Hey guys, welcome to episode 40 of the Daily Level Up Show. I'm your host, Roosevelt Cooper, and in today's episode, I'm going to share with you how I played Dungeons and Dragons last night with my wife without a dungeon master. Hey guys, so last night I played Dungeons and Dragons with my wife, and we played it without a dungeon master. So what did we use? There was 3 tools that we used in order to be able to accomplish this. The first tool is D&D Beyond, and D&D Beyond is a website where you can create all of your Dungeons and Dragons characters. You can also create campaigns and share them with your friends. You can also buy all of the books that are available, such as the Player's Handbook, the Dungeon Master Guide, the Monsters Manual, all of the additional books, the adventures. You can buy all those things on D&D Beyond. So that is the first tool that we used last night. The second tool that we use is a book called Mythic Game Master Emulator, 2nd edition, by Tanya Pigeon. And this book, it shows you how to create dynamic role-playing adventures without a dungeon master. So we use this book in order to be able to create an adventure without a dungeon master. And then the last tool that we use is called ChatGPT. ChatGPT is an artificial intelligence system. So we use this particular tool to help us with the adventure and come up with the adventure. So let's go over the 3 tools. So first tool we used is D&D Beyond. We created a campaign on D&D Beyond, and in the campaign we added our characters. So the premise behind our particular characters, we are playing a husband and wife adventurer. I'm playing Kilrin Kimbatu, who is a dragonborn druid, and she is playing Liza Kimbatu, who is a dragonborn ranger. So Kilrin and Liza are adventurers. They are first level adventurers, and in this particular adventure, I'll show you how we came up with the plot for what it is that we had them do. So those are our characters. And then the next thing we need to do was we need to come up with what our adventure is going to be. So there's 2 ways you could do that. Mythic actually has some tools that you can use to come up with adventure ideas. One of the tools that they have is called random events. So if you want to come up with an adventure, you can use random events to generate an adventure. It tells you to consider things like context, events focus, and it gives you some ideas for how to do that. But what we did was we used ChatGPT to come up with the adventure. So first thing I did was load ChatGPT, which is available at chat.openai.com, and I created a new chat, and then I told I said, give me some ideas for a level 1 D&D adventure for 2 characters that are husband and wife. So I did that, and it gave me some ideas. One is called The Missing Heirloom. Another one is called The Haunted Mansion. Another one is called The Goblin's Cave. Another one is called The Lost Treasure. 5th one it gave me was The Curse of the Werewolf. And then the last one it gave me was The Orc Warlord. So I asked my wife which one she was most interesting to her, and she said that The Curse of the Werewolf was the most interesting one to her. So once we came up with the idea for the adventure, we then created our characters, and it turns out in my wife's character's backstory, she had her character actually almost get killed by werewolves. So she has a backstory involving werewolves. And in fact, her favorite enemy is humanoids, and she has werewolves and orcs as her favorite enemy for her ranger character. So those were the different adventure ideas that we came up with. So then the next thing we have to do is in Mythic GM Emulator, there are different scenes that you run your characters through. So we had to come up with the first scene. So I'll show you how scenes work. So when you come up with a scene, the first thing you need to do is prepare list, because sometimes your scenes that are going to get generated are going to use the lists that you create. So there's two lists you can create. One is called a threads list, and a threads list are the quests, tasks, and missions you choose to pursue through your player character. You can make anything into an open thread at any time by writing it onto the threads list. Once a thread has been added to the list, it becomes an important part of your adventure and will likely be invoked by random events. So with our threads list, we created our own threads list based upon the adventure idea that ChatGPT created for us, as well as our background. So we added 3 items to our threads list. The first was discover more about the ancient artifact, because when we revised the backstory, we said that Kilrin does not know what the ancient artifact does and has not discovered its powers as of yet. Second thread, we came up with investigate the attacks in a nearby village. That was the idea that ChatGPT gave us with the werewolves. And then the third thread we added was find the werewolves that tried to kill Liza. So those are the threads that we created to start our adventure off with. And then the next item it has is characters list. And characters list is where you record important non-player characters and all other active adventure elements as the PCs encounter them. It's up to you to decide whether a character is important enough to make the list, but a good rule of thumb is to add anything or anyone that can influence the adventure. So we started off with 1 character list, and on that character list is the villagers. So those are our list, and then after we did that, we created the first scene. The first scene of your adventure is a special one because it gets the story rolling. There are a few different ways you could come up with a first scene, depending upon how much context you're starting with and how surprised you want to be. So the first way you can do it is by inspired idea, and that's pretty much what we did. So it says mythic adventures are full of surprises, but you can always start with a fully formed idea of your own. So we used ChatGPT to come up with the idea, and the idea was that we were going to do the curse of the werewolf, and we're going to get tasked with investigating a series of attacks in a nearby village. So then I asked my wife, well, how do we want to find out about the adventure? So she said that we want to come across the villages. So I had ChatGPT write an opening scene for us, but this opening scene was actually in the village. So because my wife said she wanted it to happen before we got to the village, I said, before doing that, write a scene of Kilrin and Liza arriving at Ravenmoor. Well, actually, that's the village. So I did that one, and then I said, no, we don't want that. Let's start with finding out about the attacks before we get to the village. How does Kilrin and Liza find out about the attacks at the nearby village? Let's start with finding out about the attacks before we get to the village. How does Kilrin and Liza find out about the attacks at the nearby village? So then it said, Kilrin and Liza had been traveling through the nearby forests and hills for several days, living off the land and enjoying the freedom of the wilderness. As they made their way through a dense thicket, they hear the sound of raised voices in the distance. And then it writes some more narrative, which I don't need at this point because we're going to determine what happens next. So that creates our expected scene. So then Mythic has this mechanism called testing the expected scene. So before you actually start the scene, you're going to check to see if your expectations happen using a mechanic called the chaos factor. So during the adventure at the very beginning, the chaos factor starts at a level of 5. And if you roll above the chaos factor using a D10, then the expected scene starts exactly how you thought it would. If you roll equal to or less than the chaos factor, then your expected scene changes in some way. So I rolled the D10, we got a 6. The chaos factor at this point is a 5. So the scene is going to start exactly the way we expected. So we played through the scene. We start off with hearing the raised voices. We don't continue to this part yet. We just start off with hearing the raised voices. So Liza and Kilrin decide that we're going to sneak up and see if we can hear what the voices are all about. So we did a group stealth check. We rolled a 13 as the average. So then I asked ChatGPT, if we roll a 13 for stealth, are we able to successfully sneak up and see who is the raised voices without them seeing us? So it responds, a roll of 13 for stealth could allow Kilrin and Liza to approach the villages without being detected, but it ultimately depends on the situation and the DM's discretion. Factors such as the terrain, the number of villages, their awareness level, and their individual perception and passive perception scores could all play a role in determining whether or not Kilrin and Liza are able to sneak up without being seen. In general, a roll of 13 for stealth is a decent result, but not a guarantee of success. The DM may call for additional rolls or use other factors to determine the outcome of the situation. So villages, you think about the commoner, NPC, I believe their passive perception is a 10. So we rule that this would be a success. So we had Kilrin and Liza sneak up on the villages, and we move to this paragraph. Curious, the couple moved quietly through the underbush, trying to get a better sense of what was going on. As they drew closer, they saw a group of frightened villagers gathering in a small clearing, their eyes fixed on something in the distance. So I didn't do this part yet. So I asked my wife what she wants to do. So she says she wants to try to see what the villagers are looking at. So she wrote a perception check. She wrote a 2. So obviously that failed. So then I said, well, let's approach them cautiously and see what's going on. So then it says, Kilrin and Liza approached the villagers cautiously, their senses alert for any sign of danger. The villagers tensed as they saw the couple approaching, but then relaxed slightly as they saw that they were not a threat. So then I asked what's going on, which the narrative already wrote for me, what's going on. And the villager says, it's the werewolf, one of the villagers say, his voice trembling with fear. It's attacked again, just last night. We lost 2 more people. So then it writes some stuff for Liza, but Liza didn't get a chance to say what she wanted to do. So I skipped that part. And then I asked my wife, what does she want to do? So she said that she's going to ask them, do they know which werewolf it is? So why would she ask that? Because her backstory, she was attacked by a werewolf. One of the villagers speaks up. We don't know for sure, but there are rumors that it might be a cursed member of our own community. No one knows for certain, but we've heard stories of strange behavior and unexplained absences during the full moon. Another villager chimes in. We tried to investigate, but we don't have the resources or the skills to handle this on our own. That's why we're asking for your help. So I basically said, instead of saying that's why we're asking for your help, I changed it to make them say, can you help us? So we agree. So then my wife's character, Liza, says, do you know where the werewolf went? And the villagers shakes their heads. We don't have any specific information on the werewolf's whereabouts. One of them replies, we've heard rumors and seen some strange things, but we can't say for sure where it's gone. So then Liza said, so I skipped this part. Liza says, who was the last person the werewolf took? One of the villagers replies, the last victim was a young boy. He was playing outside during the full moon and the werewolf attacked him without warning. It was a brutal and terrifying experience for the poor child. So Kieran asks, where was the attack on the little boy at? The villager responds, the attack happened on the outskirts of the village near the edge of the forest. The boy's family lived in one of the cottages closest to the woods, and he was playing outside where the werewolf appeared and attacked them. So then Kira asks, can you take us to the cottage? And they say, of course. And then that ends the scene. So next we ended the scene, and we chose to end the scene right there because we felt that was an appropriate place to end it, because we're going to have them now go to the village to see what's going on. So what we did, first thing we do is if there's any new threads that we wanted to add to the list, we would add that. So in this particular situation, we would add the help the villagers thread to the list once again, because if there's a random event that gets generated, we want it to be more likely that it involves this particular thread. You can add a thread up to 3 times on your list before you don't add it anymore, because then after that it just starts getting repetitive. We add any characters, so if we encounter any new characters, we would add them. In this particular case, we encountered the villagers, so we would add them again. Again, you can add character up to 3 times before it becomes repetitive. We remove any threads or characters list that would be relevant to remove. Like, for example, if a character died, if we no longer wanted to encounter that character, if we resolve the thread in one way, shape, or form, we can remove it there. And then the final step is we adjust the chaos factor. So we adjust the chaos factor by thinking about what happened in the scene and determining whether we think the player characters were in control of the events. So in this particular situation, we felt that the characters were in control of the events, so we reduced the chaos factor down to 4. And then we would go on to the next scene. So I'm not going to go through the whole adventure with you, but that's a general premise of how Mythic works. So next I want to show you how an altered or interrupted scene works, because we actually had one come up during our adventure. So Kilrin asks if the villagers can take them to the cottage. One of the villagers says, of course, we could take you to the cottage where the attack happened. So in our mind, the next scene, the next expected scene will be the villagers take us to the cottage. So that's what we were expecting. So then I have my wife, she rolls on the chaos factor. Now the chaos factor at this point, because we're on scene 2, we were in control of the first scene. So the chaos factor goes down to 4. So my wife, she rolls on the chaos factor die, which is a D10, and she rolls a 3. So we look here and it says, if you roll above the chaos factor, then the expected scene starts exactly how you thought it would. Chaos factor is 4. She rolled a 3. If you roll equal to or less than the chaos factor, then your expected scene changes in some way. So in the case where your expected scene is changed, check the number you rolled. If your number is odd, 1, 3, 5, 7, or 9, then it becomes an altered scene. If the number is even, 2, 4, 6, 8, and then 0, misprint here, then it becomes an interrupt scene. So in this case, she rolled a 3. So for 3, this is going to become an altered scene. So what's the difference between the two? Altered scenes, it's still your expected scene, but there is a change in the scene. So your scene begins in the next most expected way. As though Mythic heard your idea and said, let's try something else instead. So the alter scene, it could be nearly identical to the expected scene except for one detail, or it may be quite different, but it must make sense for it to happen instead of the expected scene. So that's the altered scene. It's basically the next expectation of what you expect to happen. Then, so some ideas, it could be a tweak. So you could just make a minor tweak to the scene. You could ask a fate question, which I will go into a little bit later. They also have meaning tables, inspirations you can roll on, and a scene adjustment table you can roll on. So we decided to go with a tweak. So I asked my wife, what does she think would be the next most likeliest thing to happen in terms of us arriving to the cottage? So first thing that comes to her mind is, oh, it must be a setup. So I say, okay, setup, I'll work with that. So what I did was I then went into ChatGPT. ChatGPT wrote up the description of us going to the cottage, which was the expected scene. So then I said, have there be some type of setup when we get to the cottage. So then ChatGPT wrote this. As Kilrin and Liza approach the cottage, they notice that the front door is slightly ajar. It's clear that someone has been here recently, and they can't help but feel a sense of unease. So that's how we decided to change the scene. We altered it by having it some type of setup. And here's the thing, it doesn't have to be the exact way that you describe it. Basically, you're just basically looking for inspiration, and then you can use that inspiration to determine what happens next. So that's pretty much how an altered scene works. The other option, which we did not encounter in this particular adventure, but the other option would be an interrupt scene. So what an interrupt scene is, this is a completely new scene that interrupts your expected scene. So the best way I could describe it would be, for this particular adventure, let's say we were expecting to go to the cottage. Maybe on the way to the cottage, there might be another attack. And now we got to deal with that. So that's the key with an interrupt scene. An interrupt scene is a completely new and unforeseen direction. And basically you generate an interrupt scene by rolling on what they have in here called a random event. And the random event table will allow you to be able to generate the interrupt scene. So when you roll for a random event, you're going to utilize some of these components like your threads list, your characters list. Some of these components could potentially come into play for the interrupt scene. So that's pretty much how it works when your scene does not go as you expected. I will show you combat though. So we end up having, long story short, we end up having a combat. We end up encountering a wolf. So one of the things I said was, well, who does the wolf? So the wolf won initiative. So one of the things I said was the wolf, Kilrin is in front, Liza's in back of him. The wolf wins initiative. Who does the wolf attack first? So then ChatGPT said, as the couple moves towards the source of the growling, a large wolf suddenly charges at them from the back of the room. The wolf appears to be wounded with bloody fur and a snarl on its face. The wolf wins the initiative and lunges towards Kilrin. But I didn't play this part out yet, so I just ignored all the rest of this and said that the wolf wins initiative and lunges towards Kilrin. So then, after we resolved the combat by doing our rolls, the wolf did an attack against Kilrin and missed. Liza tried to attack the wolf, but she missed. And then Kilrin casts Shillelagh and hits the wolf with his club. And the wolf took 6 points of bludgeoning damage. So I wrote that, and then ChatGPT said, kill when Shillelagh spell takes effect, imbuing his club with magical power. He swings his club at the wolf with a powerful strike, hitting it squarely on the side. The wolf yelps in pain as it takes 6 points of bludgeoning damage. Staggering back from the blow, it appears to be wounded but still very dangerous. Liza takes advantage of the wolf's momentary distraction and strikes with her hand axe. However, she misses by a hair, the blade whistling through the air and barely grazing the wolf's fur. So ChatGPT can kind of narrate the combat for us. And then because the wolf was wounded, I said, well, I think there's a chance that the wolf would run away in this particular situation because it took a pretty bad wound. So I'm going to show you another mechanic in the Mythic Game Master Emulator that you can use for stuff like that. And that mechanic is called Fate Questions. So whenever you have a question that you want to find out about what's going on, you can pose what's called a fate question. So with the fate question, you're going to use two factors. Number one, the odds. So how likely or unlikely is the situation that you are describing going to be a yes or a no? And then the chaos factor, anywhere from 1 to 9. So in this situation, our chaos factor is currently a 4. So when the chaos factor is lower, then it's going to be more likely that the answer is going to be no. When the chaos factor is higher, it's going to be more likely that the answer is going to be yes. So in this particular situation, we said, does the wolf run away? So we have to determine how likely is it that the wolf runs away. So I said that it's likely that the wolf runs away. My wife said it's very likely that the wolf runs away. So we went with very likely. So then we rolled, and we rolled 84. So if you look at the chart, chaos factor 4, very likely you have three numbers, 13, 65, and 94. So if we roll the 13 or lower, that is considered an exceptional yes. So what an exceptional yes means is whatever you said, yes, it happens, and whatever's the most exceptional way that that can happen, that's what happens. Anything between a 14 to 65 is just a standard yes. So in this case, does the wolf run away? The answer is yes, the wolf runs away. And then 66 to 93 is a no. We rolled the 84, so the answer was no, the wolf did not run away. And then 94 and above would be exceptional no. So it might be not only does the wolf not run away, but more wolves come or something crazy like that. Or in the case of the exceptional yes, not only does the wolf run away, but you get backup or something like that. So you could kind of determine that for yourself. So we played out the combat, and then so that's for fate chart. And that's what you can use if you want to find out the answers to particular questions. So we played out the combat. We were able to successfully defeat the wolf, and we ended our scene there for the adventure. So that's where we're leaving off at. When next time we play, we will pick up at the very next scene. Obviously, the chaos factor is now going to go to 5 because we were not in control. We got attacked by the wolves. We will add wolf to the characters because now we know that there are wolves working with these werewolves. So there's a possibility that we may encounter another wolf in the future. And yeah, so that's how we played Dungeons and Dragons without having a dungeon master. So hopefully you found that valuable. Again, I will put the links to the tools that we use in the description. And yeah, so you can use this to play any role-playing game by yourself without a game master or dungeon master. Or if you're playing with 1 or 2 other people or even 3 other people and you don't want to be the dungeon master, you can use these tools, ChatGPT and Mythic, to be the game master for you. So hopefully you found that valuable. Take care, and I will see you in tomorrow's episode.